It is 2024. The production crew of the new Star Wars Disney Plus series, The Acolyte, has stated they want to make the lightsabers in this prequel series on par or superior to the Darth Maul fight from The Phantom Menace. Fans naturally react, as they do with their regular level of calm.
Pushing identity politics and the message. They done woke it up! However, they expect us to tune in to see if they can beat the Phantom Menace duel with the great Lord Maul.
Star Wars is declared, for the first time, ruined forever. It is 2022. After A New Hope with The Mandalorian, the double whammy of the Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi has extinguished all optimism for the future of Star Wars and television.
You were warned what defeat would bring.
There is no hope that this upcoming Andor show will be any good. Star Wars is ruined forever. It is 2019. The final leg of the sequel trilogy, The Rise of Skywalker, has just come out, and despite renewed optimism after The Mandalorian, which aired simultaneously, the Disney era of Star Wars ends on a whimper. Star Wars is ruined forever. It is 2017. Star Wars is destroyed by The Last Jedi, a film that dared to deconstruct the formula that people have loved for decades now.
The Jedi are romanticized, deified. But if you strip away the myth and look at their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure.
Star Wars is ruined forever. It is 2015. The Force Awakens has refused to innovate on the formula that has grown stale now for decades and that people have grown to hate. The only innovation is the introduction of a new female character, Rey, who quickly becomes a target of hatred among Star Wars fans. Star Wars is ruined forever. It is 2008. The Clone Wars animated movie has just hit theaters, and fans are furious. They hate the animated style that kidifies Star Wars. The only innovation is the introduction of a new female character, Ahsoka, who quickly becomes a target of hatred among Star Wars fans.
Who hates Ahsoka? Personally, I think she's annoying. I saw the film version of Clone Wars on Saturday, and her voice got on my nerves. I also have seen her in the TV series. She calls R2 R2-y and Anakin Sky Guy. That not their names, you dumb girl.
If this animated slop is the future, then Star Wars is ruined forever. It is 1999. The Phantom Menace has released, kicking off a trilogy of films that quickly become the example of how to ruin a franchise. Each film is received worse than the last. The introduction of Jar Jar Binks results in a widespread hate campaign.
20 years ago, I played Jar Jar Binks in Star Wars. I faced a media backlash that really made me feel like my life was over.
Fans bully a literal child because they see him as the reason Star Wars is ruined forever.
Star Wars The Phantom Menace was the most disappointing thing since my son. I mean, how much more could you possibly fuck up the entire backstory to Star Wars?
It is 1997.
For an entire generation, you've only been able to see it on a TV screen. Now, Star Wars is back on the big screen. Star Wars, the special edition, starts Friday at theaters everywhere. Rated PG.
The special editions of Star Wars have launched on VHS, thus destroying the pure legacy of these classic films. Han shoots first, and there's a weird musical number added to Return of the Jedi. Why couldn't Lucas have just left his perfect trilogy alone? Star Wars is fundamentally ruined forever. It is 1983. Return of the Jedi hits theaters, completely ruining what was otherwise shaping up to be a perfect trilogy. These Ewoks, they're just so embarrassing. Fans can't imagine it getting any worse than this. Star Wars, and everything it built up all this time, is ruined forever. It is 1980. The Empire Strikes Back is released and fails to live up to the hype of the first film.
It's not a perfect film. Here's a cheap-looking sequence. The movie's Cloud City. An obvious drawing there in the background. The film's one new human character is played by Billy D. Williams, the only black man in the movie, cast, it seems, in response to the charge that the first Star Wars film was racist. Romance, a mushy part.
It is a meandering, boring film that critics and audiences are both divided on. Star Wars is ruined forever. It is 1977. Star Wars has been released. It kicks off a movement of blockbusters that sees to the end of the new Hollywood movement, kicking off the era of the blockbuster. Studio-driven films designed to draw in the largest audience possible. And while New Hollywood clings to relevance after the double whammy of Star Wars and Jaws, it evaporates with the release of Heaven's Gate, a film that comes out around the same time as Star Wars' follow-up, Empire Strikes Back. Cinema is ruined forever. It is 1974. George Lucas is a new, up-and-coming director with a wild script inspired by Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, and Frank Herbert's Dune. But the script is incomprehensible, downright impossible to follow. The dialogue is ridiculous, the characters make no sense. No one is willing to finance what would have to be a massive bomb. Lucas's film, tentatively titled Adventures of the Starkiller Episode 1, The Star Wars, is ruined before it even has a chance to be created. That's a long way of saying that Star Wars fans, they've always been a little hyperbolic when it comes to saying that Star Wars is ruined forever. And in part that's because every few years it appears that it's ruined again for the first time ever. There's a new way it's ruined, a new thing that destroys it entirely. The memory of the average fan is remarkably short. Whatever came out that year tends to be the only thing that matters. Dominating discussion. However, I think perspective is necessary when discussing any form of media, especially a long-lasting media franchise such as Star Wars.
This is fucking awesome!
The reality is this: Star Wars fans exist in a permanent cycle. It's the same cycle every single time. New thing comes out, new thing not as good as what came before. Years pass, new thing comes out, old new thing better than they remember. New thing, that's bad, worse than the other thing that came before it. Rinse and repeat. And there will be highlights, of course. After we got the disappointing Return of the Jedi, the Thrawn trilogy came out. After the special edition, we got Shadow of the Empire. With the prequels, we got a bunch of fantastic games. The animated Clone Wars movie led to the far better received Clone Wars series, though it took a little time to get its footing. And while the sequels remain divisive, it's clear that some of Disney's television, from The Mandalorian to Andor to even Ahsoka, has a fervent fan base.
This is the way.
The only thing we can agree on with Star Wars is that no one agrees on anything, especially at what point Star Wars was ruined for them. And you know what? I don't know. As a very casual fan of Star Wars, I think the whole thing is a little ridiculous. It feels half the time that no one hates Star Wars more than the average Star Wars fan. But what's odd is also the worship of old Star Wars. Specifically, whatever version of Star Wars you grew up with.
The hype surrounding this movie has been overwhelming. Now the question is, will it deliver?
Now, I'm old enough to remember how a few years ago, everybody was making fun of the over-the-top fighting of the prequels.
So we're back to the three guys we know nothing about fighting each other in a scene we have no interest in. Their flawless choreography lacks all humanity and emotions. And then, bam! Oh, that's right back to highly choreographed fighting. Hey, remember when Luke Skywalker got really pissed and snapped when Vader was taunting him? He just started wailing on Vader. There was no grace or complex choreography.
There were all these unnecessary swings and flurls and flyings and twirls and non-stop. They were theatrics that had more to do with an Errol Flynn fight than any actual combat in real life. But now we see more realistic, grounded fights, and people make fun of that. That's not to say that all the Disney era fights are good, far from it, but they feel a little more real than, say, the ballerina dancing of the prequel fighting. The formulaic nature of The Force Awakens is what led a lot of people to criticize it, but then The Last Jedi changed that formula, and now it's worse?
Let me start this review by saying, fuck this movie. Fuck this movie and fuck everyone in it.
Yes, undeniably the sequels are plagued with pivoting. The final film, The Rise of Skywalker, feels like a desperate attempt to compromise with fans, but It's not like the fans knew what they wanted in the first place, because they keep pivoting back themselves with the criticisms. After all, if fans were that upset by the stiff sword fighting of the new films, they could go back to the originals, which had even stiffer combat.
That fight, man, it was just something on another level. We had never seen nothing like that. And the closest thing was the fight between Luke and Vader in Empire Strikes Back.
Lucas has stated multiple times that he was not satisfied with how the original films turned out, stylistically especially. Hence all the special edition updates. And while many of the changes were undeniably bad and made the film worse, not all of them were. In fact, some actually make some sense. Some decisions to make Star Wars feel bigger, when Lucas isn't just cluttering the screen with aliens and animation, they do work. Mos Eisley stops feeling so empty. Cloud City feels more expansive by just giving them windows and things going outside. Granted, Mos Eisley also feels cluttered with aliens wobbling around on screen and blocking the cinema, but, you know, the stuff that works. Some does not, including Jabba the Hutt, for example, is completely superfluous to the original film, but it does add like a sense of he's there, which I guess is something. That's worth something. These films are benchmarks for staggering advancements in special effects. Even back then we knew that. But Lucas always felt he was stunted by the potential of effects and always wanted to push further and further, and I respect that. I don't always agree with where he went with those effects, but I respect the ambition. What a lot of fans need to appreciate, however, is that everything is basically aligned with how Lucas wanted it to be. Lucas supports the people in charge of Lucasfilm, and while he disagrees with certain creative choices, the overall overwhelming sense is that he's okay with what's going on. And it's made evidently clear when he backed Bob Iger during a recent attempt to boot Iger out. Kathleen Kennedy, for her missteps, is working a job that's basically impossible, and there's no way she can ever satisfy even a fraction of the people who she's working with or working for the public.
Put a chick in the linguine and make her fucking gay! And I want it lame!
You can't make all of Star Wars fans happy. No one has ever succeeded at this. Especially when she's working with the demands of the Disney corporate system. A system that requires profit, that requires increasing growth from quarter to quarter to quarter. And her misses, which they are several, are balanced by her successes, the best of which is Andor.
I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see.
Andor is the best Star Wars thing to have come out since... honestly, it's the best Star Wars thing, period, in my opinion. Every bit of Star Wars has its merit, sure, but Andor feels like great science fiction, not just great Star Wars. And I can go into detail there, but I'd rather look at the conversation surrounding Andor rather than the merits of a show that we've all seen.
It's just whatever. It's honestly a kind of a forgettable show. Look, acting was great. Cinematography was great. The writing was good. But it was a lot of little things. I mean, when we saw the camera in the previous episode, there were like screws in the wall. When we see certain architecture, it's just bricks. It's not smooth stone or sandstone or whatever it might be that was in the prequels or the originals, which kind of gives you the feel of Star Wars. The whole thing about Star Wars is to feel like it's from a galaxy far, far away. It didn't do that.
A lot of fans want the old Legends expanded canon back because, well, there's many reasons. It's what they grew up with. And quite frankly, some of the illustrations and artwork for those book covers, they're ingrained in my memory. I remember going to the library as a kid and seeing these guidebooks and seeing these incredible volumes just displayed. And that was back when there was mainly the Thrawn trilogy and a few other comics. It's always occupied this space of passion, the space of magic. But, it had these epic heroes and compelling villains. But as the Disney era continues, we're seeing many of the old Legends ideas incorporated into the expanded Disney universe. But fans, rather than be happy that the Legends canon is being reincorporated in part to Disney, are upset. In fact, some of them hate it. And sure, some ideas that are presented in the Disney canon aren't as successfully incorporated as they were in the original Legends canon. That's undeniable. But many are of comparable quality.
This is the quintessential hero whose journey from a farm boy on Tatooine to a Jedi Master saving the galaxy is nothing short of legendary.
The Jedi are romanticized, deified. But if you strip away the myth and look at their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure.
The problem is that that fans have either mythologized the old canon in their brains, or they got their information from secondhand source, like a YouTuber that's just reading off of Wikipedia. Because let's be honest, and this is a tough one, the books that you all worship, when was the last time you actually read them? Because they're not of equal quality. They're not these masterpieces. Some of them are just cheap pulp novels.
Legends also gave him a more rounded personal life, adding elements like his relationship with Mara Jade and his role as a father, not to mention the absolutely bonkers force powers that he learned.
A great example of what I'm talking about is Darth Plagueis. How many people have actually read that novel? The idea of this Sith Lord is compelling. You know, it's a villain before Palpatine, which set up the whole events of everything that transpired in the trilogies. The idea of this Sith Lord is more compelling than the character that we see in the novel. I mean, after all, a ton of people theorize Snoke would be Plagueis just to tie him in with the greater Star Wars mythology. But who has actually read the book? Because I have. And it's not good. I would even argue the book might even be bad. It gets into the weeds regarding intergalactic banking schemes, and it fails to tell a compelling, character-driven story. And that would be bad enough, but even the schemes themselves aren't particularly interesting. They're just sort of placeholders. It should feel like this grand tragedy, and yet it feels like nothing, like you're waiting for the story to get started, and it never really does. But you really can't tell that when you're watching a video where a guy tells you one version of Star Wars is good and the other is bad, while reading Wikipedia articles. A lot of Disney Star Wars lifts from the expanded universe. The Legends canon used zombies so frequently fans were sick of them. And then Ahsoka uses zombies. Boba Fett survived the Sarlacc pit in the Legends canon, and he does here too. Even The Rise of Skywalker played it safest by just copying its plot from the comic Dark Empire, where Palpatine clones himself a bunch and tries to pull a body swap thing with Han Solo's son, a la Ghostbusters 2. It was ridiculous then, and it's ridiculous now, but the reason why the Dark Empire isn't widely criticized today is because it was a comic. It wasn't a massive blockbuster. It wasn't the culmination of a trilogy of trilogies, and a lot of people didn't actually read it. The key difference between the Legends canon and the Disney canon is that Disney is putting the resources in to make these into big budget television shows. They may be rushed, the vision may be compromised in some way to meet the corporate message of Disney, but they're getting a lot of money and thus being put in front of a lot of people. And sometimes they're good, and sometimes they're not. The problem here is that a bad book is easily forgotten. A bad show, one that costs hundreds of millions to make, not so much. I'm not even saying Disney Star Wars is bad. I'm saying I like some entries more than others, but I don't think that's particularly bad. I think most of Star Wars has been consistently inconsistent. I think that the worst case of Star Wars media is Attack of the Clones. For me, this is where Star Wars was ruined for me. But also, Attack of the Clones is where Star Wars stopped mattering. Now, there are worse, I should rephrase that, there are worse pieces of Star Wars media out there. The holiday special exists after all, but Attack of the Clones is a film I found so incredibly boring. Even as a kid, I fell asleep watching it multiple times. I could barely get through it the first time I watched it. And in hindsight, nothing stands out to me other than bad dialogue.
I don't like sand.
As a kid, this is where I realized I didn't really care what happened next. I didn't care where Vader went, I didn't care where the Empire went, I didn't care what happened to the Clone Wars. Nothing mattered to me. So I just sort of shut down and forgot about it. Episode 3 is a far better film than Attack of the Clones, and that's great, but I think I liked it more because Attack of the Clones destroyed any expectations I had for this saga. When you're not expecting anything good, passable is a masterpiece. I just didn't have the passion for Star Wars. Episode 3 didn't really renew that either. I had other things at the time I was obsessed with. I mentioned in last week's video Harry Potter was a big thing, but even then, that was one of many other things Star Wars competed against. I'd rather rewatch Sailor Moon than watch Star Wars.
Sailor Moon, weekdays at 4.
We are the champions of justice!
Only tonight.
I think a lot of the fans who are angry at Disney now grew up loving the Star Wars prequels. I was not one of them. I grew up on the original trilogy, so I burned out on Star Wars maybe earlier than a lot of they did with the prequels when they came out. And don't forget, when I was a kid, the games weren't all masterpieces. I didn't play Knights of the Old Republic until much later. I didn't play The Force Unleashed until much later because I was in high school when it came out. You know, Old Republic, that came out when I was in middle school. I played that one in high school too. You know, these were much later for me. When I was a kid, the games I played was Masters of Terras Kasai and the movie tie-ins, which aren't good. They're not good movie. They're not good games. They are not good games at all. Masters of Terras Kasai I have a soft spot for, but the game is clunky, it's a mess, and even the inclusion of Mara Jade does not redeem this game whatsoever. By the time the good Star Wars games came out that everyone talks about, I was already emotionally done with Star Wars. And there were other games too, but they were PC exclusives, and I had a Windows 95, so couldn't really run those like my current PC can run those, but I digress. And even then, we were making fun of the Legends canon long before Disney canon showed up. For example, Boba Fett. The fandom blew him up to be this huge figure, thanks in part to the novels. But in the original trilogy, the guy maybe has 3 lines. And he first appears in that ridiculous holiday special. And he's beaten by a blind Han Solo by accident. It's only thanks to Dark Empire, the same work that inspired the rise of Skywalker, that Boba Fett got a second chance. And the writers took that chance to develop a really compelling character. But that character is not in the films. But let's not forget, there were tons of other ideas that Disney Star Wars had handled better than the old Star Wars. And one of them is The Mandalorians. I mean, have you ever read Karen Travis's old books with The Mandalorians? She tries to make them out to be the true heroes of the galaxy. Better than the Jedi or anyone else, but it ends up coming across as very... I hate to say the word Mary Sue-ish, but that's how they feel in Travis's works. A lot of modern Mandalorian lore is basically a revision of Travis's initial ideas. And you can thank Dave Filoni and the Clone Wars for a lot of that, which salvaged a very convoluted, very author-pettish idea into something good. And Filoni has continued this throughout his modern Disney Plus Star Wars shows.
This is the way.
But these are the things you can only appreciate if you've read the original texts that Travis created. These are works that the fans at the time and fans to this day still criticize. Except, again, by fans just reading articles on Wikipedia and not the original text. There's a difference. I think YouTube really screwed up how Star Wars fandom is currently. In a way that's unique to Star Wars because of all the level of lore analyses, the multiple hour-long reviews of all the Star Wars films, to the point where it's almost expected whenever anything new Star Wars comes out, you're going to get a 3-hour video by someone complaining about every single frame of the show. The level of analysis has really recontextualized how people experience both the current canon and the Legends canon. It's not through reading the books, sometimes out of order like I did in the library. You don't pick up a random book and read it and then figure out you've missed some things and have to go back. It's not through actually playing the games. It's through some guy on YouTube or some girl filtering all the ideas out, reading it for you, and then telling you what to think about it. You are not given the option to consider or contemplate. You are spoon-fed your opinion to you. And while we had zines and magazines and guidebooks back when I was a kid, it's not the same as someone coming up on screen like I am right now and dictating their opinion to you and telling you what points to regurgitate in online discourse. Online discussion of Star Wars is an echo of an echo of an echo. an echo of the books in Wikipedia, an echo of Wikipedia on YouTube, and an echo of that YouTuber's opinion through your words. And that's all Star Wars discourse is now. It's filtered. Either way, you're not getting the dialogue, descriptions, anything from the original books. You're getting a summary, and then you imagine the rest of it. And that's the thing. I don't think Star Wars will ever live up to the Star Wars you invent in your mind, because Star Wars is no longer a franchise. It's no longer a book, it's no longer a game, it's no longer a movie, it's no longer a show. It's no longer a comic, it's no longer art, it's no longer actors, it's no longer special effects. Star Wars is an idea. You see that now too, where modern fans claim the original films are flawless, only to slowly look so disappointed when confronted with the original material. They've elevated the original sagas to these unattainable levels. Nothing could be as good as Star Wars films they imagine. Even Star Wars can't live up to the version of Star Wars they have in their heads. Case in point, when they try to improve it by elevating the action sequences, only to rob scenes of emotional drama. So every story, even the good ones, have to be bad to elevate the idea that Star Wars was.
Pushing identity politics and the message. They done woke it up!
There were like screws in the wall. When we see certain architecture, it's just bricks. You know, it's not smooth stone or...
Number 11, please God, make it stop.
This is one of the reasons why I find The Last Jedi so fascinating, because in many ways, it's one of the few entries in the saga to actually analyze the impact of Star Wars' legacy. How the legends we create about the original film outstretch our imagined hero fantasies for it.
Yes, the most hated man in the galaxy, but you saw there was conflict inside him. You believed that he wasn't gone, that he could be turned.
And I became a legend.
Luke struggling with temptation, that's in the original trilogy. Constantly. Why would we assume Luke stops being that way just because he didn't slay Vader once?
This EU crafted an extraordinary future for Luke, transforming him into one of the most potent Jedi in history and a fan favorite.
Luke being some incredible badass isn't something inherent to the original films. It's something the legends canon created, but even then, half of Luke's victories were due to his wits and cleverness, more than his skill with a lightsaber.
Want to really get into the nitty-gritties, which would include stories of Luke that I don't even know about, and I'm excited to read and understand.
But when someone on YouTube sums up the old stories, you just hear, Luke beats this guy. And your mind fills in his solution to how he beat that guy with a lightsaber, because that's how all problems are solved in the prequel trilogy. Lightsabers. Even Yoda, a master of the Force, deals with Dooku using a lightsaber rather than his skills with the Force or wits. And that set up a lot of fans, I feel, for disappointment. And it's one of the reasons why I personally don't like the prequels. Everything is resolved with violence, rather than cleverness, rather than wit, rather with strategy.
This weapon is your life.
So many older fans do not like the lightsaber fights in the prequels. They're overcomplicated, drawn out, and sometimes boring. The best two fights are easily the Darth Maul fight on Naboo and the final confrontation with Obi-Wan and Anakin, and the latter of which I feel lasts just too long. The best moments of the fight are the initial trading of blows and the final exchange where Obi-Wan leaves Anakin for dead, but because these fights are extensions of the emotional conflict, that aspect of it is the most compelling. But swinging back and forth over a river of lava, it's just visual noise, and I don't care. Lightsabers aren't why lightsaber fights are interesting. The choreography's cool, but it's not as important as good conflict. In the original Star Wars, there were 3 lightsaber duels, and none of them were flashy. But each one had emotional impact. They are memorable. Disney also uses lightsaber duels sparingly, with The Last Jedi having 0 traditional lightsaber battles in it. Luke defeats Kylo Ren not with a sword, but with wits. I don't think I'd have as much of an issue with the Star Wars fandom getting angry at Disney if they didn't get so damn personal about it. These are movies, and at the end of the day, most movies are trash, and a few are good, and some are great. But the fandom targets individuals involved with production, harassing them until their emotional and physical well-beings are put in jeopardy. Kelly Marie Tran and Daisy Ridley are two recent examples of this. The prequels, the level of hate sent to Ahmed Best and Jake Lloyd, it's beyond cruel, and both of them suffered from it. Ahmed Best was pushed into a profound depression, while Lloyd's latent schizophrenia was triggered by cruel bullying both online and in person. You'd think the Star Wars fandom might learn from that, and as we can see with Kelly Marie Tran and Daisy Ridley, you'd be wrong. Daisy Ridley reportedly was so stressed preparing for the role of Rey that she developed ulcers. Both Ridley and Tran were bullied off social media after receiving a barrage of cruel messages. And that's just those two actors. That's not getting into John Boyega, that's not getting into Mark Hamill, that's not getting into Rian Johnson, that's not getting into J.J. Abrams, that's not getting into Dave Filoni, that's not getting into any of the crew behind any of the other shows. This is just two examples.
Fuck this movie. Fuck this movie and fuck everyone in it.
At the end of the day, no matter how much you blame them for ruining Star Wars, it's too late. The next stage of Star Wars fandom is already here. Now, when I got married, I took a trip with my spouse to Disney World, where we went to Galaxy's Edge as part of the park. And as you know, they'll have staff members dressed up as the characters. They'll show up, do a little performance, and then yada yada yada. So one came out as Kylo Ren, one came out as Rey, another came out as Chewie. Anyway, the reason I bring this up at all is because every single kid there was so excited to see Rey, to see Kylo Ren. But Chewie, they sort of took him for granted. He was just there. He was part of the set. We didn't see that excitement from the kids at Star Tours when you'd see C-3PO or R2-D2, or you'd go down, into the Empire Strikes Back sequence. But they got excited whenever things involved new characters. Whenever something they recognized from their childhood came out to greet them. And that's the next stage. When I was a teen, I couldn't imagine anyone liking the prequels, but, well, there you are. You clearly like the prequels. I'm guarantee some of the people watching this love the prequels and don't get why I can't stand them so much. And are actually writing angry comments saying why I'm wrong for disliking the prequels. You have to understand, too, we are at that stage where kids born the year The Force Awakens came out are 9. A generation has been raised on Disney-era Star Wars, and they're not online. They're not watching your 10-hour videos. They're growing up with it. And if you think, oh no, they'll recognize this slop, it's not like the old stuff. They'll know. They can tell. Will they? Because I think the prequels are slop and you love them. Let's be perfectly blunt. Star Wars isn't a series, it's an idea. It's whatever you grew up with. And if you hate Star Wars, that's because it contradicts the stuff you grew up with. Put yourself in the mindset of these kids. They are you with the prequels. How I was with you. It's that. It's just that replaying itself forever, ad nauseum. And for better or worse, they're going to respond just like all of us did when we grew up and when we grew up. When they see something disappointing, they will say, and I'm telling you this right now, it will happen. They will say, Star Wars is ruined forever.